What up, everybody? Cold Nerdcore, back out with another video, and this one is going to be the second in my series of my top 100 games of all time. For those of you that have seen my first one and are continuing to watch on in the series, I appreciate it and thank you. If you're new to the series and just coming in on this video, I'll link the first one in the description. It'll also be in the same playlist as this one, just in case you missed the first one. As the title suggests, I'm going over my top 100 games of all time, just to kind of remind people of kind of the parameters I've set for myself in this. There's only 2 games out of a single series of games allowed in this list, so it's not flooded with a bunch of the same types of series. And secondly, this isn't more so a rule and more so just allow you guys to know about kind of where this list parameters wise is sitting. I don't really go back farther than the PS1 as a gamer. I don't really have the nostalgia for the older games. When I grew up, I was on the original Xbox and a little bit of the PS1, so that's kind of the farthest I go back. So no games earlier than that will be on this list. And also there's certain genres I kind of stay away from in terms of it's just not my personal preference, which is like platformers, puzzle games, and JRPGs. Not saying some of those aren't on the list, just there won't be as many as them. And without further ado, let's just get right into the video. Alright, so first up, coming in at number 79 is Jet Set Radio Future. This is honestly a great place to start this video because this is just such a unique and awesome title. For those of you who don't know anything about this game, it's a rollerblading or inline skating game where you play as a bunch of, kind of misfits. There's a bunch of little gangs that are going around Tokyo, and you're kind of marking turf and battling with other groups and the police. Basically setting your own tags everywhere, racing people, claiming territory, and going against the police who are kind of working against all of you at once. What's so fantastic about this game, and you can kind of see from the gameplay, is the art style, the music, and just the design itself is fantastic. They go for kind of a cartoony, almost self-shaded look for the game, and it really suits it. The music, in my opinion, this is the best soundtrack in any game I've played. Even at like the gym or something like that, I will put on this soundtrack just because it's so good. The gameplay is solid. Basically, it's a mix of racing, platforming, and just world exploration. Your goal usually is you go into a level, there'll be a bunch of different graffiti marks that you have to go find throughout the level, and there's also little hidden unlocks as well throughout the level. And then by the end of the level, after you've marked all the territory, usually there'll be a boss, either another gang, somebody you can recruit into your own team, or the police, and you kind of deal with it in certain ways. You either race people, you can either go around tagging people, so you get a bunch of spray cans and just spray paint them, and that's kind of the fighting in this game. Or they'll challenge you to like follow lines or replicate their lines. So there's a bunch of little variety in this game, which keeps it spicy. Overall, this is just a game I love from the aesthetics points, and I think it's one of the most interesting, unique games out there. Gameplay is solid. As I said, the soundtrack, my favorite of all time. And honestly, if you haven't played it, it's just a fun little pick up and play game, and definitely worth the buy. It's not too expensive right now, actually, as well. All right, next up, coming in at number 78, is actually a pretty unique game. I don't know if a lot of people have heard of it. I played it a lot as a kid. So it is Marvel Nemesis: Rise of the Imperfects. I have 2 versions of this. The reason for this is because any of the games I have for the PSP or any of my handhelds, I don't know how to record good gameplay of, and my PSP currently just doesn't work. So any PSP games, I will have a substitute. So the gameplay you're seeing is actually from the GameCube version. What's actually interesting after playing both copies of this game is that the GameCube version offers a completely different gameplay perspective and different gameplay modes than the PSP. The GameCube one is actually a third-person kind of over-the-top or very far-off screen camera angle fighting game, and has a actual kind of Ultimate Alliance, if any of you have played those games, style campaign, which is where you would unlock all the characters. In the PSP one, which is the one I have put my time into and the one that makes the list for me, it's actually a third-person but very close-up one-on-one fighting game with like a ladder system built in. So basically you would play through a certain character. Say you want to play Spider-Man, you'd play through his little campaign ladder, and then you would face a boss at the end, and that would unlock a character, and you would constantly do that and go through to unlock all the characters. And there was I'm pretty sure there's like little card upgrades you can get, and it would upgrade certain attributes or certain values for your characters as well. This is one of those games. It doesn't look the prettiest. It's not the most polished, I would say. It's just one I have a lot of nostalgia for. It's a game I used to play all the time on the PSP as a kid. It's actually a pretty good little fighting game, especially for the PSP. It actually controls pretty well. There's heavy set characters, there's medium set characters, and lightweights. So it's very similar to an actual fighting game where certain style of characters have certain abilities. What I always found cool about this game is they combined actual characters that are really well known, mixed with kind of their own characters that I'm pretty sure are unique to these games. I'm not 100% on that. I'm not a comic book guy, so I don't know if these are like little sub characters, but I'm pretty sure they're exclusive to the game. Honestly, I could recommend both copies of the game. The combat is very similar to a fighting game. This one will play more like a traditional fighter, but in a 3D atmosphere, which I really enjoy. You actually walk around and there's just one other opponent. You're in kind of like this big arena. You can pick up cars, chuck it at people, pick up spears on the side of the wall, throw it at them. There's a bunch of different maps. There's like explosive barrels that you can combo your range attacks into. So there's a bunch of different environmental aspects as well as just the fighting. Overall, big nostalgia factor for me, and actually a pretty solid game. If it's cheap enough, I would recommend picking it up. I honestly would go for the PSP one in terms of the actual gameplay itself, but you actually get a lot more content in the GameCube one in terms of you actually get the campaign, which if you like the Ultimate Alliance or early X-Men games, those style of games, it's kind of like a budget version of that, and that's why it gets on my list. Our coming in at 77 is actually my first PS Vita game to make this list. It's not a PS Vita exclusive, I just own it on the PS Vita and that's what I've enjoyed playing it on. And that is Sonic All-Star Racing Transformed. I honestly got this game initially just thinking it would be a fun game to kind of putz around with. I would pick it up and play every now and then, because I didn't have a DS at the time, I had a Vita. So it was kind of like my Mario Kart substitute, just a fun game if I have to go anywhere, put it in, play a couple races, and then go on with my day. But actually, I really found myself enjoying this game, and when I first got it, I basically played almost all the way through it right off the bat. So there was no saving this game for travel. I actually just really enjoyed playing it. So what basically this game is and why I enjoy it, it's basically Mario Kart with Sonic characters and a couple other random ones through in, like Danica Patrick's in this game and Wreck-It Ralph. There's a bunch of different random ones, and then there's the Sonic characters. There's a couple from actually Jet Set Radio, which is cool. But basically what this game is, it's those characters in Mario Kart, but it's sped up. So the one thing I really enjoyed about this game is it's not similar in terms of speed and how it plays and feels compared to Mario Kart. It seems a lot faster and more reliant on keeping drift and turbo throughout the entire thing. Mario Kart's more heavy on the items in terms of items can win you a match. I'm not saying like competitively or people who play online, but versus like AI or just playing cooperatively or for casual players like myself, items in Mario Kart are huge. In this game, they're good. There's some decent items. But it more relies on your actual driving and drifting. There's also 3 different variants to the actual movement. So you have your standard carts, you can fly, and there's boats, and you'll transform throughout the races depending on map. And the gameplay for all 3 of them are pretty unique. There's a pretty flushed out in terms of the amount of content, but it's kind of repetitive campaign mode where it's really just a map of a bunch of different challenges. You collect stars depending on how good you do, and you unlock more new characters, that type of stuff. Pretty simple. But the amount of maps in this game, the GPs are fun, and the racing itself really made this one of my favorite pick up and play games, especially for my Vita. It's one of the games that's still on my console and has remained on my console the entire time. So for me, this is just one of the better pick up and played racing games I've played, and in my opinion, the best racer on the Vita. So that's how it makes my list. Alright, next up is an absolute classic that I know there's a little bit of a cult following for, especially for the main 2 games on this console era for this brand, and that is Simpsons Road Rage. What Simpson Road Rage is, it's basically a taxi game where Mr. Burns has created these like nuclear powered buses, and they're trying to take over public transit. But then you as the Simpsons basically go, nah, I don't want to do that. So basically everybody becomes their own little taxi Uber driver, and the gameplay is basically you pick your map and you spawn. There's a bunch of different characters spread out that you pick up and drop off at their destination. It's very simple, but what makes it interesting is going through and unlocking all the characters and maps. If you're a fan of The Simpsons at all, you'll really enjoy the references and the map designs and the art style. Even on an original Xbox, which isn't too powerful, it looks pretty much like The Simpsons. The driving mechanics in this game are pretty fun. You're basically this beast of a car turboing down the street, and you can bully your way through traffic, bouncing off of things, and it's basically fast-paced, really cartoony driving, and you're just going place to place, place to place, place to place, making money. What this game shines in, and what I enjoyed so much about this game, was going through, I don't know if it's technically the main campaign, because there's a little campaign with a bunch of little challenges that you advance a little story, and then there's the Road Rage mode, where you play through the map, you finish on a certain timer, you have a certain amount of money you've earned through dropping off and picking up people through, I think it's like a 2-minute and 50-second timer or something like that. And then once you get that money, you get put in a pot. Once you reach a certain limit, you can unlock either a new car, which would be a new character from The Simpsons that you're able to play as, or you unlock a new map, which I think in total there's 6 or 7 maps, so it's a good variety. And what I love so much about the variety of characters and maps is it allows for a bunch of different dialogue options between a bunch of different characters. So there's always little fun quips that you can find by matching certain characters, picking up certain characters as different characters, or there's a couple different versions of like Homer. There's Snowplow Homer or regular Homer, so he'll say different things based on that. So it's just, if you're a big fan of The Simpsons or a fan of The Simpsons at all, it's kind of fun to see the characters interact like that. And also just on itself, it's actually a pretty fun game. If you like any like the Crazy Taxi games, or Midtown Madness, if you played that on the Xbox as well, it's pretty similar to that. Our next up is actually the first game I ever played for the PS3, and that is Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots. And this is actually the only game I've actually beaten out of the Metal Gear series. It's actually one of the only ones I truly got into, and it's actually the first one I ever played. So what drew me into this game so much compared to other Metal Gear games is I think the story. The setting was really well done. The cutscenes, the interactions with all the little characters you meet along the way was pretty interesting. There was an interesting bad guy. Stealth mechanics were on point. A little fun to crawl around in your little suit that kind of matches the environment, and using the arsenal of weapons you have is just good fun. There's so many different ways to play through this game. You can go through just running, gunning. You can try for a full stealth. You can try for a no-kill playthrough, and each playthrough you can kind of make unique in its own way. But I think the story and the little set pieces in between each mission really what made this game for me. I got hooked into the story, even though I knew none of the backstory of this game leading up to this, because I've never played any of the other ones. Besides, I think I played the NES one like for a bit, but there's no real story in that one. So I was coming in blind to the story, and I just got into it. I enjoyed the kind of dark, gritty atmosphere this game creates, and even the super long cutscenes in this game, they keep you gripped to the screen the entire time, because you're wondering what's going to happen, and the entire game, start to finish, is just really interesting. And it doesn't go out into left field like Metal Gear Solid 5 with like zombie ninjas or whatever. This game, just good fun, great stealth mechanics, and an amazing story. Alright, so coming in at 74 is Def Jam Vendetta. I have this for the GameCube, and this might come as a controversial take, because a lot of people enjoy Fight for New York over Vendetta. I actually prefer Vendetta over Fight for New York. I think the gameplay is more my style compared to Fight for New York. What I mean by that is Vendetta plays honestly a lot like the old SmackDown vs. Raw 2008, 2009 era WWE games, which I was a huge fan of when I was a kid, so this kind of gave me another version of that to play with fresh content, fresh characters, and stuff like that. So it was refreshing to see in terms of new stuff, but it gave me that nostalgia of playing the old WWE games, which I love so much. So what Def Jam is and what the Def Jam series is about, it's basically a fighting game with a bunch of rappers under the Def Jam label at the time. So you got like Snoop Dogg, Method Man, Redman, Sean Paul, just a bunch of rappers mixed in with like custom characters that they made into the story. It's basically this game's about you make your custom character. Basically, you pick out of 4 presets, and then you go through a story of you are a villain at an illegal fight club. You win your first round, and then you go through basically the entire ladder of going up the ranks, and then the story gets a little more complicated. I don't want to spoil it, but there's actually a decent story in there, and there's a lot of fights, so there's a lot of content in the story. The whole time you're leveling up your character, so it has good RPG elements. You can't max out your character fully as far as I know, so there's actually some replayability in making different builds. There's also different characters you can kind of interact and ally with. You can get your own girlfriend partway through, so there's a little replayability of going through and interacting with different characters along the way. There's a bunch of different versus modes, so you can play with friends, up to 4 players I'm pretty sure, and a bunch of different maps to choose from, some of them with interactable objects as well, so it spices it up a little bit. If you're into rap, there's a lot of good rap music in this game, which I personally am, so that's a bonus for me as well. And honestly, just that classic WWE gameplay where it's grabs, reversals. When you grab somebody, you can pick a bunch of different options to do different moves. There's submissions, there's rope breaks, there's punches and kicks that have different speeds, counter each other. Punches and kicks counter the grabs. You can go up on the top rope and jump up people. It plays exactly like an old WWE game, which really is the main reason why I enjoyed this game so much. It also, being a fan of rap, had some artists that I liked and had a pretty decent story. So honestly, just a great game. Alright, so coming up next is Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Like Metal Gear Solid 4, this was actually my introduction to the series. I've never played any of the older Ultimate Marvel games. But I got this on the Vita, actually the launch day of the Vita when I initially got my console, which I'm glad I did because it turned out to be a great game. And also it's kind of hard to get this game for a decent price now. The Vita games are so stupid with their pricing. That's another video, but back to the game. 3v3, very fast pace, tons of different characters. I think in total there's somewhere around the 50 mark or 40 mark of characters. So there's a very big variety of characters in this game, and they all play pretty uniquely. There's some that play kind of similar, but the majority of them have their very unique niches and playstyles. What I enjoyed so much about this game, and what personally got me hooked into this game, was the fact that this is one of the rare modern fighting games that actually has a good arcade, a fun final boss for the arcade, and for each playthrough of the arcade, you can unlock a little comic story of how the ending affected whatever character you beat it with. So it gives you an incentive to play through the game, and also you unlock like different art and different colors for your characters along the way as well. Gives me a incentive to play through all the different characters' arcades to get their little story at the end. Definitely intrigues me and gets me going because I really enjoy, especially with characters like this where I know the majority of them, just to see how each little character would interact with the ending of this game. It's fun for me to go through and see. The gameplay also is fantastic, really fast paced, a lot of juggle combos, and basically you explode out these huge combos, usually aerials, combining a different bunch of alts together. Each character has like 3 different versions of how powerful their ultimates are, which have different effects and are different ultimates in themselves. And you can combine them together. You can swap out characters to extend combos. There's just so much you can do in this game. It's so flashy. It looks really good on the Vita actually, and plays really smoothly. I actually did get into the online a bit for this game, and it was fun as well. The servers were pretty decent. It had a little PvE mode where you would go through and destroy these like chrome robot versions of each character, and it would unlock you different, I think it was different skins or something for characters as well. I forget exactly what it unlocked you, but there was a little like the modes in the new Injustices where you would go to different worlds and beat different versions of the characters to unlock skins type thing. That was in this game as well. And overall, just a great fighting game. Really fast-paced, fun gameplay that you can, even if you're not that great at this game like me, you can just spam buttons or learn a couple characters and do these massive combos pretty easily. So it's just a lot of fun to play, to be honest. Alright, so coming at number 72 is the first Uncharted game, so Uncharted Drake's Fortune. Now the Uncharted games, basically everybody knows about. If you're a PlayStation owner at all, it's one of the games basically everybody has, the first 3 at least. And there's a good reason for that. I was very late to the Uncharted games. I probably picked them up, 2 to 3 years ago. So I really didn't start getting into them till way after the PS3. PS4 was just about done, and I finally got into these games. Which I'm glad I did, because I played through the first 3 only so far. I own 4 in Lost Legacy, haven't got to them yet. But I've really enjoyed my time with this series so far. Personally, for me, Uncharted is the second best game in the series. I personally, in these games, prefer the combat and the actual story part of the game. I don't enjoy really the climbing, and as you're just sitting there holding up a wall as your guy goes as they're reading exposition or something like that. That doesn't really interest me. It's the same thing with Assassin's Creed, where you're just climbing up stuff. I don't enjoy it. I'm also not a huge puzzle guy, so all those aspects that I honestly think were more prevalent in the second game aren't really my personal preference. But in my opinion, this game is fantastic. Gun mechanics are great. For one of the earlier released PS3 games, it plays really well. I enjoyed the Sully and Drake banner. This is just one of those games that if you're a PS3 owner and you played it, which you most likely have if you're a PS3 owner, you most likely have one of these on your top 100 if you're making a list, or top 50 or top 10 on the console or something like that, because they're just so well made games. Great third person combat, great stories, great adventure, great storytelling, and one of my favorite things about these games is the banter between characters. I really enjoy that, especially Sully and Drake. So if you haven't got into the series yet, highly recommend it. Alright, so up next we got Assassin's Creed Black Flag. I've talked about this game a couple times on the channel. So I'll first touch on the single player, which is the main portion I've talked about on the channel a lot. What I enjoyed about this single player a lot is it's one of the last games that focuses on the old style Assassin's Creed game before you got to like Odyssey, Valhalla. Those other games have a different combat style. They're more focused on hack and slash with the stealth mechanic as more so optional. In this game, it's still the same as Assassin's Creed 2, 1, where it's more focused on the actual stealth mechanics. But what they do fantastic in this game is they focus more heavy on just storytelling about the actual character you play as, Kenway. And the story they're telling through this is so interesting from start to end. This is basically in the pirate era. I don't know exactly the exact date and time frame they're going for, but it's with pirates. The era they create, the atmosphere they create is fantastic. The characters you run into are great. Kenway himself is interesting. He goes from this guy who's more focused on being a pirate, who happens to stumble across some Assassin's Creed gear, to basically kind of embracing it later in the game. I won't spoil how here gets to here or whatever, but that's kind of the gist, and it grips you along his journey, and he's a very likable character. They kind of took the boat combat from Road and amped it up, made it play a little smoother, and added a bunch of boat customization. You can customize your character's outfits and stuff like that. And really the campaign, good fun, tons of content, and one of the last games in the old style of Assassin's Creed. So if you prefer that style, this is a great game to pick up if you haven't played it yet. But what I want to touch on a little bit more is the multiplayer, which is the gameplay you're seeing this entire time. Because I've touched on the campaign so many times on this channel, I wanted to focus on the multiplayer a bit. So what separates this game for me compared to other Assassin's Creed, which have a great story, great characters, even the older style Assassin's Creed or the new ones, which I enjoyed as well, like Valhalla, is that the multiplayer in this game was fantastic. For those of you who have not played it, it's basically kind of a hide and seek version of Assassin's Creed. So basically, you either play the solo games where you have one person you're hunting, one person that's hunting you, and it's kind of like a free-for-all. You have to figure out who's hunting you and stun them, so they then change targets, while at the same time hunting your target without him being able to stun you. So it's a good kind of cat and mouse. They give you certain abilities you can have, which kind of impact your gameplay, and you can create your own little play style if you want to be a little more aggressive, or you want to go for more stealth kills, which earn you a little more points. There's also the one, as you're seeing in the gameplay, that is a team mode, where you're basically one team of up to 4 versus one team of up to 4. One team focuses on hiding and blending in together to gain points passively, while stunning people and using their abilities to avoid chases. Then the other team has to figure out what characters of the same AI, because everybody's the same character basically, blending in are the actual players, and figure out and kill them. And the stealthier and less noticed you kill somebody, and the more points you get. So it's a really interesting concept. It was introduced in Brotherhood and carried over in this game, and I think it's the best version in this game. I got into it really heavy when I first got the PS4, so I thoroughly enjoy it. There's still games you can find to this day. The gameplay you're seeing here, I recorded like 10 days ago, so there's people still playing this game on the PS4 or PC. It might be crossplay, I'm not 100% on that. But if you haven't played this, fantastic game to pick up. I would definitely recommend the multiplayer. That's why it makes my list. Alright, so coming in at number 70 is a game I've actually touched on in my Hidden Gems video, and that is Anarchy Reigns. Yes, I still don't have the sticker taken off. I'm really lazy about that. What I love about this game so much is the style and art style and just the atmosphere this game creates. It's such a fun, free-flowing, really arcadey feeling game that Platinum Games develops. It really much takes on that classic Platinum game style, where it's a third-person beat-em-up hack and slash game, where with crazy over-the-top characters with crazy cool weapons. Like one guy has a chainsaw hand, and you can kind of combo and slam people down with your chainsaw and like cut them in half and stuff like that. Or there's a guy who has the other guy you play as is a guy who has swords in his boots, I think, or something like that. He has like 4 swords or something like that, and can kind of do like spins and stuff. Basically what I'm saying, very over the top, very Platinum Games, really cool character designs. And what this game does so well is it offers you a ton of content and a really fun playthrough of the campaign. So the campaign you play is 2 main characters. You mishmatch and have choices between 2 characters, one guy with chainsaw, one guy with swords, and their gameplay is very different. You basically load into a map. There's a bunch of different little challenges that you do. Once you complete all the challenges, there'll be like a boss fight or something like that, or a story mission. You do that, go on to the next area, rinse, repeat, with some more hardcore and harder boss fights mixed in along the way. It's just one of those games that's super fun from the start to finish. As you go through the game, early you'll start off doing some little dinky combos, but it's still fun to see everything explode. And then by the end, you're doing these crazy combos, doing some animation canceling, knocking up AI constantly, doing like a bunch of air combos and air grabs. And the gameplay is just so fun to learn and so fun to master as you play through the campaign. And the boss fights and special missions and stuff like that keep such a good variety throughout it. It's very similar in the style of game. You're always playing a hack and slash game, but they switch it up very nicely. And honestly, this is just one of those games that's super fun to play through from start to finish. Alright, the lucky game that gets to be the epic funny number is Far Cry 3. Far Cry 3, fantastic game. In my opinion, honestly, one of the best open world first person shooters, or open world games in general, on the PS3 era of consoles. What this game does so well, first off, it's the first game out of the Far Cry series where I started to notice that modern style of Far Cry game, really that one we see every single game, every single game now on, that same formula be implemented and done really well. So what these games are, giant open world games. Every game basically you play as either a rebellion or uprising or survivors, and you basically go around capturing a bunch of bases and checkpoints, growing your area, going through little campaigns, recruiting allies, and slowly going through different areas, beating kind of the main bosses of certain areas of the map until you get to the big boss, kill the big boss, story ends. What makes this so good, even though it's kind of a very simplistic style campaign, is the fact that this game in particular, I think this came in 5 really for me, really nail the bad guys and the character development throughout the game. So for me, when these Far Cry games are at their best is when the bad guy, you can tell they have a good reason why they are a bad guy, or they're just absolutely insane but interesting. They have a bunch of different little kind of minions or sidekicks that are also interesting in themselves. They have, each area has their own little specific story, characters you're helping out that are specific to that area, that all have their unique little side stories that you can go through and really learn about the areas that you're in, how they tie into the current bad guy you're fighting, and going through that little story. Once you get that little story done, it ties into the overarching story. You'll have like a little separate campaign mission that's kind of separate to the conquering, which will be specifically story related, and ties everything super well together and creates this kind of flow from area to area to area to area, but still keeping it in that overarching story. So honestly, that's really what separates this game from other FPS games. The combat's pretty decent, guns handled decently well. There's bows, which I really enjoy for stealth combat, which you can do pretty well in this game. And there's grenade launchers and regular assault rifles. The one thing this game does really well is the upgrading system. It's always fun to create your own little guns and kind of customize them your own way. But overall, just a really fun game, lots of content because it's a big open world, and a really good story for an open world FPS. Alright, next up is Deus Ex Mankind Divided. These are stealth, action, first-person shooter RPGs. Basically what these games are about, you play as Jensen. He's a kind of special agent almost. He has a bunch of cybernetic implants, and you're in a world where there's kind of a morality and religious struggle between people who are augmented with all the cybernetics and people who aren't. There's a battle between different companies and religious groups and politicians about kind of augments and their use, especially military uses, and that kind of where this game in terms of main story hovers around. This is one of those games that honestly I think it's better to go in blind, and I would recommend playing the one on the PS3 first and then going into this one, but playing them both blind so you can get the full story and kind of absorb it as you go, because this is one of those games that creates such a interesting world, interesting story. Jensen's a really cool character. You feel like a badass playing as him. He has a lot of really cool stealth abilities that you can try to create your own builds. Really good RPG mechanics where you can level up different perks, level up different guns, create different mods for your guns. So you can kind of create your own play style each playthrough. So there's good replayability in that. The first person stealth mechanics are pretty solid. And the great thing about this game is you can choose to play it as a stealth game or basically a run and gun action game. There's some sections where you have to play stealth, but the majority of them you can just choose to open up and start firing. And it's very easy to play through as that way as well. So there's a good variety of gameplay options. They also utilize kind of the older Fallout game system where you have certain points and certain attributes, and that can affect certain conversation elements you can do. So you can kind of persuade or influence people into helping you or open up secret passageways along the way. So there's always interesting routes you can take to each level. So there's multiple ways you can complete most story missions. And really what this game does well is creating a dark, gritty story that will keep you locked in the entire way. Having you play as a really cool character that you'll enjoy playing as and be rooting for the entire time. And creating some interesting bad guys that actually have reasons to do what they're doing, and creating all these unique factions that you kind of interact with along the way. Really the reason why I got into this game so much. Alright, so coming out at number 67 is a multiplayer only game that I mainly play on the PC while I don't have a physical copy with me, and that is Dead by Daylight. Now I'll start off by saying Dead by Daylight is not the most polished game, definitely not the most polished multiplayer game, and a lot of the times can annoy me, but I have to be honest, where I've put so much time into this game and really enjoyed playing both sides of this game so much that it had to fall on the list somewhere. So what Dead by Daylight is, for those of you who don't know, it's basically kind of a hide and seek game. So I think part of the reason why I love this game so much is it kind of ties into my love of the Assassin's Creed multiplayer and adds different elements to it, especially being able to have these two distinct sides that you can kind of switch on depending on what you're feeling. So what I'm referring to is there's two distinct roles. So firstly, you have your survivors. So basically what they are, they're the normal humans of this realm. And their goal is to complete 5 generators across the map, which are kind of spread out in kind of like a grid style, while avoiding the killer, which is the other team that is trying to stop them and sacrifice them to this entity by placing them on hooks 3 times to kind of eliminate them from the game. In total, there's 4 survivors. They basically start on the kind of the opposite side in like an L of the killer, and their goal is to kind of spread out, do the gens, open the exit gate, and leave. They can use hiding, they can use running around loops and throwing pallets or vaulting windows to break line of sight with the killer. And it's kind of a baby parkour game mixed with the hide and seek elements of like an Assassin's Creed game, which kind of makes it interesting. You can create a bunch of different builds with a bunch of different perks that kind of create your own unique specializations for your characters. And on the other side, you have the killers, which are a bunch of different either created characters by the company, or they've had a lot of licensed third-party characters like Cannibal, Michael Myers, Stranger Things, Demogorgon. They added Nemesis from Resident Evil, and apparently there's rumors that Wesker might be added soon. But basically they all have their unique playstyles, different ways they go around tracking, hunting, and killing these survivors. So basically you find your little characters that you like to play. So I think the variety of gameplay and also just the constant update, constant new characters, and new maps being added always keeps me interested in this game. So it had to make the list somewhere. I have like over 1,000 hours in this game, so I felt like it had to make the list. Alright, so next up is one of those rare times where I'm putting the entire series on one section just because they play so similar, and that is the Left 4 Dead games. So I own both these on the 360. I also have the second one on the PC. And what these games are, for those of you who don't know, linear story survival zombie shooter games. So you basically play as 4 survivors. They all play the exact same. You go through set linear story missions. It's kind of breaking up into 5 sections. You go, basically your goal is get from one safe room to the other without dying. There's a bunch of different zombies. There's the normal ones where you kind of just mow them down like paper. And then there's these special zombies which all have different ways to kill you, different ways to separate you from the team. And your goal is to just make your way throughout the game to get to the end. It's a very simple concept, but it's executed very well. The gunplay is really fun. In the second game, they add melee weapons, which is actually a good variety, and they're kind of fun to just attack and whack, and the chainsaw is really cool. They have a bunch of different grenades, which interact with the levels really well and add some strategy. But what these games thrive on is the simplicity and well executed gameplay in terms of the combat mechanics and the actual map design, as well as the multiplayer, where you can choose to play as the zombies as well, and go around killing and strategizing with other people to kind of find choke points or places where people are split off and pick off people at the right time, which when you get a good like double pick or get two people out in a really quick fashion is really satisfying. These are just really classic Valve games, quality made, a lot of fun to play through either solo or online, so that's why they make the list. Alright, next up is a game from a series that I wish wasn't dead in the water, basically, and that is Medal of Honor European Assault. This is a fantastic original Xbox PS2 era World War II shooter. For those of you who haven't heard of the Medal of Honor franchise, or for those of you who have only heard of the Battlefield clone versions which came out in the PS3 era, the older Medal of Honor games, this era and the PS2 era, and I think there's some on the PS1 if I'm not mistaken, are some of the highest quality first-person shooter war games that you can find on the console. And I never even touched the multiplayer for this game, and I can say that it's one of the best on the console. What these games are great at is basically telling a interesting story through, specifically in this one, they get a lot of veterans describing certain operations that they went on and made missions out of them. So it's interesting to hear from them and then actually play the mission. The sound, the music, and the atmosphere each level creates is fantastic for the console. In my opinion, the menu music for this is fantastic. In total, I think there's about 15 missions in total. Each of them have their own unique setting, kind of go through these own little mini campaigns. I think there's 5 in total, which have anywhere from 5 to like 3 missions in them. And what this game does different between other World War II, World War I shooters at the time is they actually have a squad mechanic in this game where you have usually 3 people with you, and you can kind of tell them where to go, hold certain angles, attack certain areas, flank people and stuff like that. The gunplay is fantastic. Every single gun sounds different. It's crisp. They have little symbols to show you where you can get like headshots and stuff like that. So if you're big into FPSs like myself, this series is a must-have to get into, and in opinion, this is my favorite out of the series. Alright, so next up we have Uncharted 3. In my opinion, the best game out of the Uncharted series. I won't spend too much time talking about the gameplay or actually what Uncharted is, because I've already touched on it earlier in the video, but I will say what I think Uncharted 3 does so well is it takes everything Uncharted 2 kind of created in terms of the combat, and I think elevates it, and I think it's perfected in this game in terms of out of the ones I've played. It might be recency bias, but in my opinion, I found this the most interesting campaign out of all the 3. Drake was a little annoying. He's a little whiny throughout this game compared to other games, but I find the banter and character interactions the best in this game. Also, some of the set pieces and action sequences you put through in this game, a lot of fun. And when I think of this series, most of the memorable moments and gameplay moments I remember are from this game. So that's kind of how I judge which one is my favorite out of a certain series, is especially with movies and games, is which one, when I think of the series, do I automatically think of the most, and that's this game for me. Alright, so coming at number 63, in terms of rareness of console and gameplay style, probably the rarest on the list, and that is Mario Bros. 3. This is for the Game Boy Advance. It's one of the only, if not is the only platformer on this list in total, and there's a good reason for that. This is, in my opinion, the best out of the Mario games I've played. I've played the original, the second, this one, the Wii U one, and Mario Galaxy. The reasons for this is I think it has the best level design out of the earlier Mario games, and also it's the one I have the most nostalgia to personally. I had this on the Game Boy really early of my life cycle as a kid of owning the console, and I played it all the time. The music's fantastic, level design's great. I'm not a huge platformer fan, as I said, but I still have fun picking up and playing this game. And it's just one of those games, I hear the music, I hear the loading screen, I load up some of the classic levels I remember as a kid, and you just get that nostalgia, rush of fun. And even if you're just playing a couple levels, it's good fun, you're entertained for the whole time. And it's one of those games that's such a classic, such a nostalgia factor for me, that it really had to make the list of being such a quality game and having that huge nostalgia factor for me, that it just had to make the list. Alright, next one up is Mass Effect. I know I'm holding the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, which is 3 games in 1. But the one I'm specifically talking about in this section is the first game. First up, just gonna touch on it. The reason why I'm holding the Legendary Edition is because I think personally, if you are to get any version of these games, I would recommend the Legendary versions. The games run way smoother. They've made some UI and combat changes that help, especially the first game, a ton. And having all the DLC and all of it put into one place is very easy. And also, especially the first game, it gets rid of the issue of having these huge loading times that were such a pain in the ass to play through, and really slowed up the pacing of the game and made it a much more enjoyable experience. So for those of you who don't know about these games, they're third-person shooter RPG games, and really what these games focus on is having very solid and kind of Gears of War-y almost combat system with some squad mechanics built in, where you can have certain characters that you can choose out of a pool of characters that kind of are on your ship or your main crew, and they all have their own unique abilities and combos of abilities, and you can use those in combat as well. You have your own created character, which you can either customize or use a base one. You can choose from a bunch of different classes, which unlock your different abilities and kind of switch up what gun, how tanky you are and stuff like that. So there's a lot of replayability in that factor. And then you take that character, plug them into this super rich and deep world, and the main thing I enjoy about these games so much is, one, the overarching story of each game is so massive in scale, but each game it ramps up the scaling but still keeps it interesting, and having these smaller moments mixed in with these huge kind of galaxy saving moments and tying them in so well. Also, all the side quests and characters you interact with in these games are so interesting to learn about, do the little side quests, and each side quest you take on in the first game and complete, and usually has some sort of choice you make partway through it that kind of determines an outcome that you can go back and find a different outcome for. So there's always replayability with a side quest and main quest. And my favorite part of these games personally is interacting with your squad and having the character growth from the first game to the third game, and seeing all the different characters you've recruited grow and interacting with them after every single mission. You get to hear their feedback, get to hear what they thought of the mission, and all the characters you interact with throughout the campaign missions or throughout the hub world. The characters you choose to bring along will have different reactions and say different things to different AI, so there's always replayability in figuring out how different characters will react to certain situations. In my opinion, one of the stronger stories, and actually a really interesting bad guy, and sets up the rest of the series so well. So I would definitely recommend getting into it if you haven't. Alright, next up, number 61. If you stuck through so far, thank you. We're almost done. But this game is Infamous Second Son. If you don't know what the Infamous series are, it's a third-person hack and slash mixed with kind of like third-person superpowers games. I've talked about it a couple times on the channel. It's actually on my top 10 PS4 games list, which is also on my channel. But for those of you who don't know about this game and haven't watched that video, basically what this game is, it's a open world superhero game where you can play as a bad guy or a good guy. There's very linear, specific, obviously good guy choice, obviously bad guy choice, and it kind of shapes your character, his look, his emotions, how he interacts with different characters, his attributes in terms of his stature and his morals type thing, and interacts with how the city views you and how people view you day to day and during missions. So there's 2 distinct playthroughs of this game that add a little bit of replayability. And really what the appeal of these games for me is it has really good combat. It's a really cool concept of basically these conduits are brought into this world, different means. It's usually like explosions or contact with other people who happen to be conduits as well. And there's these entities that are fine with them and kind of use them to restore order or kind of ally with them. And in this game particularly, there's kind of this police state government that their whole goal is to shut down and jail conduits because they're different and these powers are dangerous. So basically you play as the main character, I forget his name. What you learn is that he is a kind of conduit of conduits where he can leech people's power from, and unlike the first game and second game where you're only playing with electricity, he gets a bunch of different abilities. He has neon, he has smoke, but they each have their own different gameplay mechanics, so it adds a different variety from the first game and really switches up the combat. What these games are so good at is having some clean, crisp combat mixed with an actually pretty interesting story. It's a little linear and predictable, but it's one of those predictable that it's done really well, so you want to hear how certain characters will react, who will live, who will die, and you want to see it all the way through from the start. And it's also not a super long game, so you can kind of get a fun 15 to like 20 hour gameplay session out of it, and by then you'll have a little fun story. It kind of feels like you played through a movie almost, in terms of like you have this really fun story, had some fun combat that went along with it, and you just had a good time. That's how I would describe this game, honestly. Alright, then coming at number 60, the last one I'm going to be talking about this video, is Lollipop Chainsaw. This is another one of the ones I touched on in one of my Hidden Gems video, and actually going back and playing it to record it, I realized it's actually probably one of the games from the Hidden Gems series that I've done that I've enjoyed the most and have gone back and played the most. So this game is just a really fun take on a zombie movie. So basically you're playing as Juliet Scarlett. She's a cheerleader. Her boyfriend, very like early cutscene, like 2 seconds into the game, gets decapitated and partially turned into a zombie, and a big zombie apocalypse breaks out in her town. And basically her family is a bunch of zombie hunters, and they all have their own unique personalities, and you interact with them throughout the story. But basically what this game is, you're playing a 80s style zombies movie, but very crude comedy mixed in as well. So the whole thing is basically Julia has this chainsaw gun that she goes around, you smack a bunch of zombies doing these cool combos. Really fun gameplay. It's not as flashy as like a Bayonetta or something like that, but it's flashy enough where it has all these cool colors. You can combo in pretty cleanly. There's like stun mechanics, there's decapitation mechanics. You can combo in multiple zombie hits at the same time. You can mix in ranged and melee attacks. You can also ride your chainsaw around. There's a bunch of goofy combat mechanics built in that flow really well. And I think the best thing about these games is the replayability of each level, because there's, I think in total 10 levels that each have their own main story part, where you go in through the level, you interact with usually somebody from Juliet's family, you go through, fight a lot of little mini bosses and a bunch of just regular zombies, and then you get to the end and there's usually a big boss fight, which are pretty unique for each level, and each have their own unique theme, and really that kind of resonates throughout the entire level, which makes them pretty interesting. The whole time it's broken up by like these goofy mini games, and certain sections, there's a certain section where you're playing baseball with zombies' heads. There's certain sections where you're cheerleading your boyfriend's head on a zombie that you put it on, and so he can lift things to get it out of your way so you can move on. You can ride your chainsaw like a lawnmower and jump off of ramps and stuff. So it's very goofy and over the top, and that's what makes this game for me. Definitely a game I constantly go back for and go back to just pick up and play for a bit, so that's why it makes my list. So there you have it. That is the second video in my top 100 games of all time. That would be 79 to 60. Let me know what you thought about my picks. If you haven't, let me know some of the games in your top 100 or top 10 or whatever. Let me know in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching. And remember, everybody has some nerdiness at their core.